for Cunningham. The question is this bill be now read a second time. We call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Appropriation Bill No. 1 and 2, 2016-17 and the Appropriation Parliamentary Departments Bill No. 1, 2016-17. The combined total appropriations being sought by these supply and appropriation bills total just under $100 billion. This is an important budget, but it is also a budget unlike others. This is a budget that has been put before the people of Australia at the last election. Notwithstanding the deliberately dishonest scare campaign by Labor and their union bosses, on any quantitative measure, this budget has been endorsed by the majority of Australians. Let us put this clearly on the record. Bill Shorten and Labor did not win the election. Labor has 69 seats in this House, while the Coalition has 76 seats, a clear majority. We may not always agree with the way our fellow Australians vote, but we must always respect the collective statement of intent by the Australian community through the ballot box. Clearly, there will be some qualitative differences on certain budget measures, but simply put, Australians do not want the government to spend more than Australian taxpayers can afford. Mr Deputy Speaker, we all have a moral responsibility to restrain spending, boost investment, encourage economic growth and guarantee a strong social safety net. Today's budget position is not what it was when the Howard government lost office, and it will take some time to rein in public spending in a responsible way. There are some important truths we must acknowledge, and we need to cut Australia's suit according to our cloth. Labor's magic pudding economics that underwrote year-on-year promises of a non-existent budget surplus resulted in increasing deficits and leaving disappointed Australians genuinely concerned about our economic future. Mr Deputy Speaker, the last time Labor delivered a budget surplus was in 1989, 27 years ago. Instead of delivering a secure economic future to Australian taxpayers, all Labor offers now is their most appropriately named leader, short on vision, short on policy and short on integrity. Mr Deputy Speaker, while I recognise the current Labor leader wants to run the government like a union, Australians do not want their government to spend their money like a union boss with a union credit card. More debt is not the measure by which I want future generations of Australians to judge us. The Parliament must work for Australians now and especially for future Australians. I reflect on a phrase attributed to St Francis of Assisi, which seems appropriate given the enormous challenges facing the 85th Parliament of Australia. Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible. For government, money to make things happen can only come from three places: increased taxes, increased borrowings, or savings. The critical importance of adequately funding the National Disability Insurance Scheme is especially important to me. In May this year, I spoke on the National Disability Insurance Scheme Amendment Bill 2016, noting the website of the member for Jagga claimed that the NDIS was properly funded when Labor left office. This is simply not true. Savings that Labor claimed were to be directed to the NDIS were simply returned to consolidated revenue. They were not set aside for NDIS. You simply cannot direct the same funding if it has already been used. My colleague on the other side, the member for Lilly, promised a surplus many times, and that was what he claimed was where additional disability service funding would come from. So despite distributing campaign brochures claiming they'd actually delivered a surplus, let me just remind you once again, Labor has not been capable of delivering a surplus since 1989, 27 years ago. Mr Deputy Speaker, on the other hand, the Coalition government takes our financial responsibilities to the NDIS very seriously. Those with disability, their carers and individuals and organisations involved in the provision of services within the disability services sector depend on adequate funding for NDIS. To meet the future costs of the NDIS, we're establishing an NDIS savings fund which will hold unspent funds from the NDIS as well as the proceeds of saving measures from better targeting our welfare spending. These funds can then be reinvested back into delivering the NDIS and contribute to filling the current funding gap that exists. Mr Deputy Speaker, let me now turn to my electorate of Ryan. In this special part of Australia, I want so much more from my electorate than what I could justifiably ask for at a time when responsible government demands that we rein in spending. But in this budget, I have many things to celebrate, including a never-ending pipeline of innovative projects and exciting and inspiring local entrepreneurs to champion. Our National Innovation and Science Agenda will create a modern, dynamic 21st century Australian economy that will transition the Australian economy from a winding-down mining boom to a burgeoning ideas boom. With one of the world's leading universities, the University of Queensland, now ranked 55th in its academic ranking worldwide and second in Australia, there has never been a more exciting time to be the member for Ryan. Already in the top 10 for commercialisation in the world, the University of Queensland is well positioned to leverage Australia's natural strengths in science, innovation and technology to secure Australia's future prosperity and high standard of living. In my previous role as a local councillor, I was part of the team from Brisbane City Council that put forward a very effective way to deliver first-rate internet services for South East Queensland, especially in Brisbane. In effect, the whole of Brisbane would have had fibre to the premises services by now, if it were not for the previous Labor government's arrogance, incompetence and spite. While I understand residents are disappointed that the rollout of NBN has not occurred sooner, the use of HFC network and fibre to the node and fixed wireless are part of the government's multi-technology mix approach to building the network, which uses the most appropriate technology to deliver the NBN sooner and at less cost to taxpayers. Also, as part of our Mobile Black Spots program, new mobile base stations in Mount Crosby and Corunna Downs will bring a much-needed boost to mobile coverage, providing benefits to emergency service operators, businesses and residents. These areas were overlooked by mobile network operators due to commercial factors, and the former Labor government refused to invest in fixing mobile black spots in regional and remote Australia. Mr Deputy Speaker, in this special part of Australia, small things do lead to bigger things. Who here hasn't tried some of the fine jerky products produced by Geronimo Jerky? Starting their business in 2011 as the side project of four friends, Geronimo Jerky now turns over literally tonnes of beef each month to produce large quantities of the product in 8 different flavours that fill orders with the Australian Defence Force, various mine sites and more than 400 locations across Australia. As a local business residing in Blackwood Street, Mitchelton, Geronimo Jerky, along with other traders, is also benefiting from the Coalition announcement providing $208,000 for CCTV in the area. This project, committed under the Coalition's $40 million Safer Communities Fund, was secured through an ongoing campaign by the Blackwood Street Chamber of Commerce and enhances the security of patrons and businesses. Another great success story of innovation and entrepreneurship in the Ryan electorate is that of Open Gear, an innovative leader in the next generation smart solutions to protect and manage critical ICT infrastructure. Starting in 2004 with just 2 employees at iLab in Toowong, Open Gear now employs 64 staff worldwide and has offices across Australia, USA, the UK and Europe. From humble beginnings, Open Gear now boasts many international customers, including Tier 1 companies, DFAT and the Queensland Police, and they've been recognised with many product and technology awards. Mr Deputy Speaker, governments can never hope to fund the literally millions of hours of work, care and support provided by tens of thousands of volunteers. The Ryan electorate not only has some of the smartest and brightest people in the world, it also has some of the most truly beautiful souls who continue to warm our hearts with regular acts of human kindness. I'd like to again say a big and very public thank you to the dedicated network of Meals on Wheels volunteers who pride themselves on providing more than just a meal to some of our most frail and vulnerable residents living in our neighbourhoods. We have some of the most inspiring community-spirited volunteers in our electorate. Every day of every week, volunteers from the Western Suburbs, Kenmore, Ashgrove and Mitchelton Meals on Wheels organisations ensure that members of our community who are sick, elderly, frail and disabled benefit from this valuable community service. Recently, I had the pleasure of also paying tribute to 3 members of the West Junior Rugby League Football Club. Erica Quinn and Ron Raper were recognised for their tireless contribution to the club with an oval named in their honour. And with more than 40 years association and still an integral part of the club today, Margaret Kyle has also been recognised with an oval named in her honour. Margaret has held the position of President, Secretary and Treasurer. Mr Deputy Speaker, the contribution of so many volunteers in the Ryan electorate is humbling. Indeed, actions do speak louder than words. Since coming to office, the Coalition Government has honoured our strong commitment to building Australia's future defence capabilities, while also recognising the enormous contribution and personal sacrifice made by our veterans to our country. As most members know, the federal electorate of Ryan is home to the Gallipoli Barracks and one of the largest populations of serving Australian Defence Force personnel. We are a community that supports our serving Australia's Defence Force personnel, past and present, and we're committed to recognising the significant contribution of our veterans in protecting and enabling the way of life and the quality of life we all enjoy. Mr Deputy Speaker, current and former Defence Force personnel and their families have welcomed the Coalition's decision to reverse Labor's cuts and increase defence spending by $29.9 billion over the next 10 years. This marks a significant contrast between what a coalition government will do and what a Labor government did not. Indeed, it will be difficult to find any serving Australian Defence Service personnel or veteran who would consider the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government anything but the worst in our nation's history in this area. While Labor increased non-defence spending sharply over its 6 budgets, the defence budget was slashed by 10.5% in 2012-13, the biggest single cut since the Korean War. In that 1 year, Labor ripped $18 billion out of the defence budget and cut defence spending to its lowest level since 1938. This resulted in 1,200 job losses in the ADF alone, delays to 119 defence projects, and then 43 more projects were reduced and 8 more projects cancelled. Not surprising, Labor's defence budget cuts, deferrals, procrastination and a growing lack of opportunity for local suppliers meant our local defence industry also shed more than 10% of its workforce. Only a coalition government will ensure Australia's national security and economic prosperity both now and for decades to come. And in doing so, we will maximise the opportunities for our defence industry to participate in our historic shipbuilding programs. Mr Deputy Speaker, in closing, I repeat the phrase attributed to St Francis of Assisi, which offers some guidance for all members and senators in this 45th Parliament of Australia. Start by doing what's necessary, then do what's possible, and suddenly you are doing the impossible. I commend this bill to the House.